Hello, and welcome to another episode of Joe and Kat Chats. Today we're talking about
Yes,
global
ma'am.
issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're revisiting this topic
We are.
because this is, just a thing that's going to always come up, and we're trying to stay topical. So we're here for the ongoing global issues.
Absolutely. And Ms. Wells, what we decided to do with the Joe and Kat Chats franchise, the conglomerate, if you will, what we've decided to do is we've gone ahead and said, every 10 episodes, we're going to give everybody a little refresher course. We're going to get everybody up to speed on global issues, because not everything that we talk about happens just in the United States and in Canada for everybody else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff happening around the world, and we want everybody to know that there's more than just where you are and what's happening where you are. The world is a big place and a big community, but it's small in nature because we are all connected digitally, and the human spirit connects us all in one way or another. We want to make sure that we consistently remind ourselves of that.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true.
Thank you. First, couple of housekeeping issues, because I'm a neat brother. I like to organize. I like to stay on point and on time. All right. Again, we talked about voting in the previous episode. I urge everybody to go ahead and vote. Please exercise your 15th, 19th, or 26th Amendment rights. I got an I voted sticker. So in honor of making sure that everybody is cognizant of what we actually need to do in terms of voting, I'm going to put it right there so everybody knows that Joe Nice voted. I participated. All right.
Yes.
So I voted. So everybody vote. I'm not going to tell you who you should vote for, but vote.
Yeah.
You're eligible to do so. There's 92 million people that choose not to participate in the electoral process. That's shambolic, and we can do better in America. We should do better. Now, quite honestly, America should have better political candidates, but that's another conversation.
Agreed.
It's another conversation.
Yeah, very much agree. Yeah, I encourage everyone to go vote as well. I do not live in the US. I'm not a citizen there, but this election does impact people around the world, including us here in Canada.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
so, vote wherever you are able to vote. If you're in the US, please vote. It does make a difference, despite the system being convoluted and frustrating to deal with. So it does make a difference.
It makes a difference. Every vote makes a difference. Second housekeeping issue that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. How are you?
I'm doing well. Same old, just keeping myself busy as usual. How about yourself, Joe?
I am excellent. I had a wonderful day with the little girl.
Good.
She and I went to her diving practice. She still needs to work on a couple of rotations when she dives off the 6 or 9 meter board. But other than that, the judges did well. The Russian judge was a bit sketchy, but other than that, it was cool. It was great.
Awesome. Very fun.
It was great. And as many of you all know, with the Joe and Kat Chats franchise enterprise conglomerate, I like props because, hey, you know what? I like showing people what we're going to do, then talking about what we're going to do. Then actually, as my old friend Nigel back in Baltimore, when we used to play soccer together, he'd always say, we're actually delivering the package. Okay. So we're going to actually deliver the package today. Okay. So today's global issues. All right. Got my passport ready and my passport cover, and somebody very close to both of our hearts gave me this passport cover, and I'm very appreciative of that. Okay, I've got my UK passport application here because I am a citizen of the United Kingdom, so
Awesome.
I qualify for a passport, so I'm working on that. All right, my parents are born in Trinidad. I'm getting my Trinidad paperwork organized, so I'm trying to be on some Austin Powers vibes. 3 passports, truly an international man of mystery. The Black James Bond. That's where I'm going with all of this. So what we're talking about today is international issues. Miss Wells, we're up front in the big seats. We got the port wine. We've got the vegan food. Where are we flying to first, please?
Yeah, well, I thought we would start right here at home because I know that I talk about it a lot, and I think it deserves another mention because there's a lot going on here in Canada. Because not only is there, still stuff going on with all around the globe with COVID pandemic stuff, but Indigenous folks are also being systematically and systemically oppressed by our government. And most recent instance of this has been the Mi'kmaq people in the region that is now known as Nova Scotia, which is on the eastern side of Canada.
In the Maritimes.
Yes, in the Maritimes, if anyone's unfamiliar. So what's been happening is there have been some colonial settlers who are racist and have been setting fire to and destroying the lobster catch of the Mi'kmaq people, which they are claiming is a, what you call it? I wrote it down somewhere, oh my gosh. They're basically saying like it's an environmental issue that they're harvesting lobster, but really it's under sort of the guise that like the Mi'kmaq people have rights to set traps outside of the season because they have the right to a modest living, basically.
Sure. Okay.
So yeah, so this has been an ongoing issue for the last few weeks, and I do encourage everyone to look into this further because and donate where you can, show your support, and really I think that this is sort of just another reason why we need to be really paying attention to Indigenous issues in Canada, because this is it. Like, this is, if folks who have listened to us all throughout the last several months are not paying attention to this because they see issues, you know, that are outside of their own lives as not their own problem, I think that that's an issue that we need to be addressing, and encouraging everyone to really look within and start participating where you can. You don't have to attend protests, although there are many going on as we speak. There was one yesterday, and yeah, we need to be raising up and taking responsibility as white settlers in Canada for, yeah, and the government has been just useless.
Ms. Wells, question for you with regards to the Indigenous people in Canada. I know in our previous episode of the Joe and Kat Chat series, I think it was the reparations episode, you insightfully discussed the Truth and Reconciliations Act in Canada. Mm-hmm. Has anything been done with the Trudeau regime to execute on any of the promises from the Truth and Reconciliation Act?
No. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission went on for several years. It came out with a report, and Trudeau campaigned like 5 years ago about, you know, in support of you know, Indigenous peoples, but he has not, his administration has not done anything really to take an active role in helping Indigenous folks.
Okay.
He promised to provide clean water for many of the people who are living on reserves, who have had boil water advisories for decades now. He's done nothing. In fact, his government has probably done more to harm Indigenous folks than he's done to help. And any help that he has provided, for the most part, has just been sort of hot air, I guess is the right term. Like he's just providing lip service to Indigenous folks in Canada. It is a shame. Yeah. I will say we're recording this on October 21st, and
correct.
Yesterday, on Tuesday of this week, there was a House of Commons in Canada held an emergency debate by the request of MP Gord Johns. So what they discussed was the terrorist attacks happening on the Mi'kmaq people and their livelihood. They discussed a federal response. They wanted to define what a moderate livelihood is, which is good because that's the defense that the Indigenous folks need.
Sure.
And what they did was send more RCMP officers, and they decided to do negotiations with the Mi'kmaq Nation to define what a moderate livelihood is, which is good. But like, the Mi'kmaq people should just be defining that for themselves. So I assume that this is going to be more of a negotiation, meaning the government's probably not going to accept just what they provide as their definition of what that is.
Sure.
And so Canada has never upheld any of the promises anyway. So although it's great that the House of Commons was discussing this, and it's great that the Premier proposed, a panel to discuss the treaty rights. I understand that the Mi'kmaq people and indigenous people across Turtle Island, which includes the United States and Canada, like, they don't trust the government, and there's good reason for that. And
True.
so that's something that is, underlying these issues, and I think that people need to understand that aspect of it as well.
Interesting. I know, Kat, you mentioned the indigenous people on the East Coast in the Canadian Maritimes, and Nova Scotia has a close place in my heart because my godmother, is a lovely Black Canadian woman named Josephine, and she's my godmother. And she was actually my mother's roommate in nursing school in England. So I obviously have a connection, a tangential connection with Nova Scotia. Are there any other situations in terms of indigenous people in Canada that are being oppressed by either white Canadians or by the Canadian government?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots. I highlighted 3 in my notes for this week. So
Okay.
the first one was the challenges with the terrorist attacks, basically, with the Mi'kmaq, against
Sure.
the Mi'kmaq people.
And that's in Nova Scotia.
That's in Nova Scotia. There's
Yes.
also the Six Nations, which of the Grand Rapids, which is in southern Ontario.
Okay.
That is the 1492 land back lien protests, and those folks are trying to protect some unceded territories from development.
Mhm.
Not too far outside of Toronto, actually, and these folks have been, fighting the good fight for several weeks now, and I think since August, actually, so a couple of months now. And so people should be, sending resources to them as well. There are lots of there are lots of folks you can donate money to and resources. And another one that I wanted to highlight is the Wet'suwet'en.
Yes.
Yeah, they're on the West Coast,
Mhm.
and the hereditary chiefs and allies there are fighting against the Coast Gas Link pipeline to protect headwaters and much more. And so there's lots going on.
Okay. A question I have for you with regards to the indigenous people in Canada. Has anybody in Canada from an indigenous group decided to present anybody in Canadian government with a plan for reparations, similar to what CARICOM has done in the Caribbean or what HR 40 is done in the United States?
That's a really good question. I don't think that has really been discussed through, like, across Canada with
Sure.
Indigenous folks.
Okay.
There's lots of different people involved and bands and different groups.
Mhm.
And so I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that in a factual way, but I have the impression that probably these folks have just been, really trying to survive, so much so that they probably don't have the capacity or the ability to band together at this time, because there are
Understood.
so many different fights going on right now.
Mhm.
And I think this is going to be a unique time in history where it's time for us to step up and really defend the indigenous folks of Canada and Turtle Island as a whole. So,
understood. Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. I know you said you also wanted to talk about maybe some stuff that's happening in the United States, because you wanted to take care of North America. What's cooking in the US?
I mean, there's just all sorts of stuff going on in the US all the time, as folks know. I mean, protests for Black Lives Matter are still ongoing. These are fights that will forever be ongoing until we get some sort of, reparations. We need all sorts of things happening. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff going on everywhere, but the main stuff is revolving around the election that's upcoming, and by the time this comes out, it'll be a week away.
Correct.
So yeah, so I think that's about it. There wasn't much much noteworthy stuff I wanted to spend too much time on, but
Sure.
I mean, there's issues going on all over the place,
Right.
and folks need to vote. Vote.
Vote. There's a couple of things I wanted to add with the United States. I know there are still fires taking place in California.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado has had, I think, several hundred thousands of land burned as a result of some of the fires that are taking place there. And to give a brief follow-up on one of the episodes we did about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the refugees episode. Next year, 2021, the refugee ceiling, and that's the allotment. And again, the allotment is not necessarily just specifically refugees. It's refugees, human trafficking victims, special immigration visa holders, Amerasians, victims of torture, unaccompanied minors, Cuban and Haitian entrant program recipients, and there's one other group I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I got 7 of the 8. So that's 15,000, which is the lowest number since the Refugee Access Program has been initiated. Mm-hmm. So again, this is Trump. The Trump regime showing not only their xenophobia, but their anti-immigration status. So just keep that in mind next year when the United States continues to bomb 7 or 8 or 9 countries, and there's continue to make other foreign countries into failed states, or try to take them over via coup, which we're going to talk about next in a couple of countries, and we don't let them in. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah,
and I think that is a really relevant point given what else we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely.
And just before we move on, I didn't write this in my notes, but I just remember a couple of days ago reading about there's, I think, over 500 children at the southern border right now who the administration has lost their parents.
It's 542 children.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's something that folks need to look into further as well. The asylum seekers and folks on the southern border that have been detained are being treated horrendously, and it's just heartbreaking because it's ongoing and it's been years and years and years, and these children are suffering. Their parents are suffering. I would not be surprised if the parents that are missing have been killed. So that's a big issue happening in the US right now.
I know I mentioned refugees, and I know something that we talked about with the United States in terms of countries that have a lot of refugees. And one of the countries I mentioned in the previous episode was Sudan. And most recently, Sudan was removed off the United States terrorist list. So basically, you can come into the United States if you come from Sudan. Let's not forget that due to military intervention from the United States and a bunch of other countries, that there's an entire generation of Sudanese refugees, the Lost Boys of Sudan, if you're familiar with this, who were forced to fight as child soldiers, who never knew, who didn't grow up with their parents, who were teenage boys or younger who ended up having to fight alongside grown men and kill other people when they weren't even ready to actually go out on dates or learn anything of that nature. And they were taught to kill at a young age, and they were separated from their parents. The atrocities that that happened with the Lost Boys of Sudan are happening now on the other side of our border, of the United States border, or inside the United States at the border of the United States and Mexico. There's going to be an entire generation of Central and Southern American children who will never be able to see their parents again. They won't be able to say, te quiero mama, te quiero madre, te quiero padre. They'll be able to say that anymore. And that is heartbreaking, the horror. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's happening in the DR Congo right now as well. Absolutely. With the conflicts, and yeah, that country is full of a really problematic history. But yeah, there's child soldiers happening right now there. I'm sure it's happening elsewhere as well. This is a big issue, and it seems difficult to talk about, but it's important for people to be aware of this stuff, because the implications for those children, not only just being in conflict, whatever it may be, if it's war or considered war or not, this has lifelong traumatizing implications, and it really impacts people and generations in a big way. So,
absolutely. And kind of the transition from what we were talking about before in terms of United States military intervention and coups, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Bolivia and the Bolivian elections that took place over the weekend, and the previous party led by Janine Áñez, who, again, we talked about this in the previous Global Issues episode, who took power via military coup over the first indigenous president in South American and Central American history, a gentleman named Evo Morales. He's the head of the MAS political party, it's Moving for Socialism Party, and he was forced into exile. In addition to him being forced into exile for the past year or so, many of mayors in some towns that were pro-MAS, pro-Socialist Party, were also forced out of office and had death threats. Many of them were there were reports of many of them being forced into town squares and being publicly embarrassed by having their hair cut by military forces supported by the current regime, by Janine Áñez. So Evo Morales' second in command, his right-hand man, a gentleman named Luis Arce, decided to run for the presidency of Bolivia. And he won. And he won the presidency in grand fashion, with what's called a landslide vote. Now, many of the socialist policies that helped uplift Bolivia, that helped franchise Bolivia, Luis Arce was the architect of many of those policies. He has a master's degree in economics. He from, I think, Warwick College or Warwick University in England. He helped create a lot of the banking regulations that allow the Bolivian people to have some sort of agency. So Luis Arce did a wonderful job with the election. And then his second in command, and I had the gentleman's name written down here. It's a gentleman named David Choquehuanca. David Choquehuanca. He is also of the same indigenous group as Evo Morales, the Aymara people. The Aymara people speak their own language. The Aymara people have their own culture. They have their own norms and values. And many of the people in Bolivia supported the MAS party. Now, Carlos Mesa was the previous president, and Carlos Mesa was booted out of office around this when Janine Áñez came in. Now, Carlos Mesa was partly involved in the coup that was attempted by the United States. And we're going to talk about a little bit of shadism and colorism with the three countries in South America that have been involved with United States potential takeovers. and how colorism plays a role into all of this. Because Carlos Mesa, if you look at him, he looks like a skinnier version of United States Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz. Looks like Ted Cruz. But if you look at many of the people in his cabinet, they look like you, Catherine. They look like you. But then if you look, if you look at many of the people that are potentially being vetted for Luis Arce and David Choquehuanca's cabinet, they look a lot darker skinned. They look more indigenous. We saw this situation take place in Venezuela with Juan Guaido, who was installed and self-proclaimed by the Trump administration. And the elected president, a gentleman named Nicolas Maduro, and the people of Venezuela loved Nicolas Maduro. They loved him. He was able to reduce poverty. He was able to increase social investment. He was able to increase school enrollment. He was able to decrease infant mortality. He was able to increase clean water and sanitation for the country. And Nicolas Maduro was the handpicked successor to Hugo Chavez. And Hugo Chavez consistently has given the United States the middle finger, consistently. Because what does Venezuela have that the United States would love to have a lot of? Oil. So whenever the United States says, hey, you know what? How about some democracy? That's code word for, get the hell out of the way. We'll install who we want to be our puppet, and then we will take all your resources and you won't get anything in return. So Nicolas Maduro was like, no, that's not happening here. We're going to do what we want when we want. We're going to take care of the people we need to be taken care of. And again, he was a direct disciple of Hugo Chavez, who was completely supported by the Venezuelan people. And we're seeing a similar situation in Bolivia right now with Evo Morales basically saying, hey, Evo Morales and Luis Arce saying, hey, you know what? We won this election. We're going to uplift our Bolivian people. We're going to make sure our lithium mines stay here in Bolivia, and the people of Bolivia get to reap the natural resources and benefits of lithium. It's not going to Elon Musk to make batteries. It's not going to Google to make, or Apple to make better batteries for Apple laptops or iPads or iPods. We're not doing any of that. The lithium's going to stay here. If you want the lithium, you got to come to us to get it. You got to come to us to get it. And to kind of continue along with this, and there's one more thing I wanted to make sure I highlight here. In Venezuela and in Colombia, the shadism, the darker skin, light skin conflict was quite honestly a race war. The Chavez supporters, the Chavez supporters, and in Bolivia, the Áñez supporters who were lighter skinned, who look like you, Catherine, who lighter skinned, they were like, hey, you know what? We're in the minority, and our candidate's not going to get elected. So we need to get into the streets. We need to protest. So what did they do? They protested. But as an added salt in the wound, so to speak, to show their class solidarity and their class hierarchy, the women marched in high heels. The men marched in suits. I'm going to say that again. The women marched in high heels. The men marched in suits in protest of a pro-socialist government. And then on the opposite side, the other supporters, especially in Bolivia, were wearing blue, red, and yellow shirts, which is reminiscent of the flag. I'm sorry, not in Bolivia, in Colombia.
Oh,
okay. I'm sorry, not in Colombia, in Venezuela. They were wearing shirts that were looking like the flag. When Juan Guaido, who was involved in Colombia, if I'm not mistaken, in Colombia, Guaido supporters referred to Hugo Chavez, as a monkey, and referred to him as other offensive names because of the color of his skin. So the race war that was taking place in these three countries has been ever made more apparent, not only through United States military intervention, but through, quite honestly, what's happening in the United States right now, and realistically, the everlasting effects of colonialism, where, hey, if you're white, it must be right, and if you're not white, you're in the wrong. So we're seeing that taking place more and more each day. We're seeing more of an uprising of indigenous people in Colombia, where indigenous people are going against Iván Duque, who is the president of Colombia, and they're marching on a day-to-day basis against anti-drug violence. They're marching every day to make sure that the indigenous people of Colombia get the rights that they so richly deserve, because they are Colombian citizens just like anybody else in Colombia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was so much, and I appreciate all of that. And I just wanted to add in that this, the military intervention that the United States has done in these three countries particularly, has also been supported and influenced, and Canada has been involved as well, as particularly in Venezuela. Yeah, we're so closely tied, and I think that many Canadians, if anybody's watching this, like, we kind of see ourselves as the peacekeepers, like we were in the 90s. We kind of were in the 90s, but that was sort of the national image that we were trying to portray. But now we're just fully in support of the imperialist and colonial, military interventions in particularly in Latin America, in
Right.
South America. And so I think that is something we really need to be clear about. Our countries are not innocent, and we're part of the problem, and we need to be demanding change, because it's time. We can't be doing this shit anymore.
I agree. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution.
Yeah.
And it seems as if the United States and Canada are more problem-oriented rather than solutions-oriented.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just driven by corporations that influence political moves more than we think that we are, especially in the United States, which
especially in the United States
is something we're going to talk about in a future episode. So
we absolutely will.
Yeah, so hopefully people can hang tight for that. Another thing I just wanted to mention is I saw something recently about how the police brutality particularly in countries in South America, is really, really violent. And I think that sort of ties into this military intervention. This has been a very long-standing thing in South America, countries particularly. And the news article or the video I was watching was saying that, there's oftentimes there's not a difference between sort of the military and the police forces, corruption. And so when these folks are protesting, they're met with horrendous violence, and we need to be understanding that these people are putting their lives at risk in a major, major way.
Absolutely.
And so, it's all just sort of tied in. This is happening here, it's happening in your country, and it's happening all across the world.
Absolutely.
And
I know, let's not go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I know this is sort of jumping around a bit, but I think it's worth noting that we're going to be talking about Nigeria a little bit today as well. And the protests that have erupted there recently are in direct protest to the police violence there.
Absolutely. One other footnote that I wanted to add before we take it to the motherland, to Africa. Let's not forget that about 5 or 6 weeks ago, a 42-year-old lawyer named Javier Ordóñez was killed by Bogota Colombian police. And while he was being choked out with a knee on his neck, he said the words, "No me ahogo," in Spanish, that the direct translation means "I am drowning." But realistically, it means "I can't breathe." He said those words, "I can't breathe." Those are the same words that we heard Eric Garner say 5 years ago. Those are the same words that we heard over the summer when Derek Chauvin put his knee on George Floyd's neck in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Those are the same words: police violence, police brutality. He said it in Spanish, but if your Spanish wasn't good, you didn't need to know Spanish to understand what was happening. A cop was choking out a man, a father of two, a lawyer. dead in the street, and the people of Bogota protested, and rightly so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is probably the overarching theme of this episode, and a lot of the conversations we do have is, police brutality is rampant. It's horrendously violent, and these protests are dangerous, but we do them anyway because we know what's right. The power of the people, like
Exactly.
we have the power, and we know it, and we can push for changes, and we need to do
Exactly.
that, and that's why we're participants in these movements, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know you said you wanted to talk about what's happening in Nigeria, with police brutality. Care to go ahead and outline what's going on in Nigeria?
Yeah, so there was a squad, I guess, a special anti-robbery squad that was established a long while ago in Nigeria. It's
Right.
short-named SARS.
Correct.
It's a notorious police unit, and it's been involved in harassment, torture, extortion, extrajudicial killings.
Hmm.
These are long-standing issues, and so recently, within the last few weeks, couple weeks actually, I think it's very recent, protests have erupted, and this SARS has been disbanded officially by the government. And
Yes.
so this is a great news, but the protests did continue. So what happened is the protests, the protesters, I guess, have decided that that's not enough, and they are now demanding just the end to police brutality in general. Uh,
Yes.
and yesterday, unfortunately, there was a large protest where Nigerian forces opened fire on protesters, killing and injuring many, many, many
Mhm.
people. So, out to all of the survivors, out to all the protesters there. Yeah, our hearts are with you. This is horrendous. Like these police forces are murdering people just out in the open, and it's appalling.
Appalling to say the least. Appalling to say the least. And let's not forget, Nigeria also has its issues in the northeastern part of the country, where there are Boko Haram and Al Shabaab forces who are, let's not forget, years ago, all those schoolgirls were taken by terrorist groups. That happened in Nigeria.
Right, yeah.
That happened in Nigeria. So there's a lot happening in Nigeria. Africa has long had issues in terms of election problems and civil unrest and
Yeah.
civil wars. Ivory Coast right now, there's an election taking place with the current president, Alassane Ouattara, who's seeking an illegal third presidential term. And there are protests taking place in the capital city of Abidjan. There are protests taking place there on a day-to-day basis. And of course, police are roughing up the protesters there. In Guinea, which is not too far away from the Ivory Coast, the president of the country is a gentleman named Alpha Conde. He's 82 years old. 82 years old. Now, if you're 82 years old and you're running for president, that's an issue. But then again, who am I to talk? Because we have two 70-plus-year-old white guys that are running for president in the United States. And so take that what you want. But Alpha Conde is trying to rework the Ghanaian constitution to run for an illegal third term.
Mm-hmm.
So what we see happen in a lot of these African countries is you have leaders that stay in power for a long time because there's really not much opposing forces can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is definitely a thing that happens all over. In many African countries, there's a lot of
Yes.
corruption. There's a lot of long-standing issues that are sort of a legacy of colonialism, and so we could get into it. And there's a lot of history. It's very complex in many of these places, but I do encourage everyone to go back and listen to our episode on colonialism.
Please do.
And yeah, because we do mention a lot of that.
A lot of that in Africa.
Yeah,
We
it's a
do a lot of
lot
that.
of. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mentioned a lot of
exactly.
it. And one other thing that I wanted to mention that's happening right now in terms, we spoke about California and Colorado. Let's not forget in Tanzania, or the other alternative pronunciation, Tanzania. I've heard Tanzania as an
Mm.
alternative pronunciation. Mount Kilimanjaro is on fire, and hardly anybody's talking about this. Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the highest peak in Africa, is on fire right now, on fire. And the firefighters are having issues controlling that fire. So let's pay attention to not only the civil unrest and the human catastrophe that is taking place across various countries in Africa, but the environmental situations that are also taking place in not only Tanzania, but many other countries across Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's not like these are not issues that are disconnected, or are issues that are disconnected. These are very tied together, and you know, the most vulnerable in our societies, in our cultures, are also the people most impacted when disasters happen,
Correct.
like fires, and you know, all the other disasters that can and do happen.
Yes.
So yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning. I agree with you. So thank you for that, Joe.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And I know we got about 15, 16 minutes left or so. We've been
Yeah.
moving rather quick. You know, we got the passports out. We're going to take it to the Middle East. I know we wanted to spend a bit of time, and I know you wanted to talk about the situation taking place between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
Yeah, so there's a territorial conflict going on there. I wasn't actually super familiar with this before looking into it for today's chat, so I appreciate you mentioning it to me, because I guess there's been sort of, in this region, the Nagorno-Karabakh
correct.
region, it's been inhabited by sort of traditionally Armenian identified people,
Yes.
but it's now sort of, they sort of just were in this region in Azerbaijan, and they've been sort of self-governed since 1991, even though Azerbaijan has technically been ruling over them. But they've been sort of self-governed since 91, where with Armenian support. So this conflict reignited just in late June this summer. And on September 27th, which is just a couple of weeks ago, Armenia actually declared martial law because of this conflict being reignited. This region is a mountainous landlocked region, but trench warfare is actually happening here. It's currently going on, and there is some major fears that Russia and Turkey are going to have to be drawn into a regional war. And I just want to say that again, that trench warfare is happening, which is not something that happens very often these days anymore. And so this is a really contentious issue, and it takes a lot for people to be willing to go into war, as they were in World War One. Many people in the surrounding countries have been mobilized to go and help on either side of this conflict. So, do you have anything to add?
It's there have been loads of protests, obviously, the the capital of Azerbaijan, and the name of the city escapes me. In the capital of Armenia, uh, Yerevan, I think is the name of the city, the capital city. And the world's largest Armenian population outside of Armenia is none other than Los Angeles, California. So, in addition, I actually had some friends of mine who are of Armenian descent who live in Los Angeles, and there have been loads of protests in addition to the Black Lives Matter protests that have been taking place in the Los Angeles metropolitan area on a daily or almost daily basis. The protests in support of Armenia and to prevent the Armenian genocide that is taking place right now at the hands of the Azerbaijanis is ramping up and becoming more and more voluminous on a day-to-day basis. So we should pay attention to what is happening there also, because it's important. And to kind of transition to another former member of the USSR is Kyrgyzstan. Like, Joe, why are we talking about Kyrgyzstan? Well, the president of Kyrgyzstan, a gentleman named Sooronbay Jerebkov, I'm sorry, I mispronounced it, Jeanpekov,
Okay.
announced his resignation. He's just like, you know what, I'm done with this. Why? Because there are people protesting in the capital city, which I think is Bishkek. They're protesting in the capital city there, saying, look, we don't want you anymore, we want you out. So because of these violent protests that have been ongoing, the government has basically dissolved. So the acting president is a gentleman named Sadir Japarov. Sadir Japarov's claim to fame was being imprisoned for attempting to kidnap a political opponent. I'm going to say that again to make sure everybody understands what's going on here. People of Kyrgyzstan protested against the previous president and forced his resignation. The government dissolved. The acting president was recently in jail for attempting to kidnap a political opponent.
That is terrifying.
Bananas. It gets crazier, Miss Wells. So during the whole transition of power, they let Japarov out of prison. They're like, okay, yep, you're free to go. You're free to go. We'll let you out. During all of the protests that are happening around Kyrgyzstan, they let Japarov out. Now, Japarov wants to change the Kyrgyzstani constitution so he can be elected president, because there's a rule in the Kyrgyzstan constitution stating that a caretaker leader cannot oversee elections that they are a part of. So right now, he's an acting leader, or he's a caretaker leader. So he wants to be president, but he can't be elected president because he's a caretaker. So imagine the levels and depths of corruption that are taking place right now. If the Kyrgyzstani people said, you know what, yeah, we want you out, and the guy that was in prison for trying to kidnap a political opponent is now the leader of the country. And now that guy wants to go ahead and rewrite the constitution so he can be elected president, because he can't be elected president now because he's overseeing a country that he's temporarily being in charge of. Mind-blowing.
Yeah, that is wild. That is a
mind-blowing.
Wild story. Yeah.
If that was a Hollywood script and you cast, I don't know, me as the lead role, you had you as one of the lead characters, we get a few other people in a lead role, in some other character, in some other roles in the movie, and we presented that to a Hollywood movie studio, nobody would believe it.
Yeah.
Nobody would believe that. No, come on. There's no way they're going to let a guy out of prison and have him run the country, and he's in prison for threatening another political opponent. Nah, come on. Nah, get out of here with that script. That's happening now.
Oh my gosh. That is wild.
Bananas.
Yeah. And I think just before we kind of move on here, we wanted to mention Lebanon. There's been a protest for a year now. Protests happening for a year now.
Over a year, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And also, I mean, people hopefully remember that the explosion that happened, that was awful. I mean, it's been a couple of months now as well, and you know, they're still recovering from that.
It's been 2 months.
Yeah. So yeah, I think was there something you wanted to?
Still recovering, and let's not forget.
I was going to ask if you wanted to talk about the several prime ministers that they've had in the last year.
Yeah, they've had 3 prime ministers in the past year, 3, and the government has completely been destabilized. Inflation has taken over beyond all new levels, and there's been a petition to have France potentially recolonize the country during this potential time of unrest, which is shocking to say the least. Yeah. There's one other country that, again, is a former USSR member that we've talked about before, but it bears mentioning again, is Belarus. Lukashenko is still in power. The protests in Minsk, Belarus are still happening on a weekly basis, and they've intensified. And along with the intensification of the police, of the people protesting, has been police intervention to quell the protesters.
Yeah.
So again, once again, police violence increased in a positive relationship with the amount of people protesting in Belarus. So let's keep our eyes on what's happening over there also. Now, we can't keep our eyes on everything, but again, part of the reason why we're doing this chat today is to make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on, because there's stuff happening that's outside your door or maybe next door.
Yeah, that's so true. And yeah, you might not know about it, but it's happening, and we just want to keep everybody sort of informed in their own way, and definitely encourage people to do their own research once you're aware of it. So it's definitely, that's what the goals are.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We're coming up on about 7 or 8 minutes left. I know there's a pile of other countries we could continue to talk about, but I know Thailand. I was just, it's a true story. I was in Bangkok in February of this year. It was one of the last places I was able to travel internationally. And I had plenty of time to walk the streets of Bangkok. I walked around the JJ market. I had the coconut from the coconut guy with the big cutlass at the front. I ate more than an unreasonable amount of pad thai in the 2 or 3 days I was there. And it was yummy. Trust me when I tell you. And so was the coconut ice cream. But what I also experienced was this entire sense of calm, other than the 37 or 38 degree weather during the time I was there. And that's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So it was hot. There was no inclination of any sort of protest taking place. There was nothing. There wasn't a vibe in the streets that I was feeling where people were like, okay, you know what? Yeah, something's going to happen real soon with us protesting against the monarchy. There wasn't any of that vibe. The vibe I was getting was, okay, we're worried about this COVID-19 business, and it might shut us down for a while, which it actually did. There wasn't any, and again, I've been to places where you could feel something's happening, or you see something happen, and then when you see it, it's like, oh wow, it becomes even more real. I didn't get that when I was in Thailand earlier this year. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, people are protesting against the monarchy, and they want to limit the powers of the monarchy. And people are tired of the unemployment. People are tired of again, police brutality in Thailand. And the people are out in protest. People are protesting. People are in the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just read this morning, actually, and again, we're recording on October 21st. So protesters have actually given the prime minister 3 days to resign as of today. And so they're calling for the monarchy to have less power. And so if that doesn't happen, they're asking for the prime minister to resign. So, this is ongoing, and it's getting real. I mean, it's been happening since the summer. For a couple months now, but yeah, Thailand is one to be keeping an eye on for sure.
Absolutely. And I know we're going to need to wrap this up soon, but Europe, I think we need to go there and close out with Europe. Europe right now is essentially decided to lock down for many major countries. England has decided to do what's called a 3-tier level of lockdown. France and their 9 largest countries have decided to say, hey, 9 largest cities have decided to say, hey, you know what, curfew. Speaking of Africa, I was speaking with my friend Zied, who, congratulations to Zied, who just finished up his dissertation. He gets to defend that relatively soon. It's my brother. That's my brother for life right there.
Congrats.
Yeah, 4 years of hard work. We had a nice little chat on WhatsApp the other day. And he's in Tunis, Tunisia. He was telling me that in Tunis and in other cities in Tunisia, they've decided to go to a curfew for the next, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. Belgium is on a curfew. All the movie theaters and restaurants and bars shut down, closed up. So there's a lot of countries in Europe that are deciding to lock down again, and they're locking down again. Spain is at a massive uptick in cases. Same for Italy. So
Same with Canada.
Same with Canada. And the United States, obviously, we're dealing with our craziness here. So there seems to be, again, this consistent uptick in cases across Europe. There's the refugee situation in Europe where people are trying to figure out what's going on with the refugees that are in Greece and Lesbos and where to put all of these refugees. Hungary and Poland has said, no, we don't want any of these Middle Eastern people or any of these Africans coming into our country because we're racist and we don't want you here. So there's a lot that's going on with Europe right now that I think people also need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, France also just had a terrorist attack, a stabbing happen.
Yes.
A teacher was murdered. And I mean, we could talk about this for many minutes, but we won't. But Macron, I think it's noteworthy mentioning that he called it an Islamist terrorist attack, which is fueled in racism, that just labeling it that in and of itself. And if you're not sure why, then please message us. We can talk about it at length. But yeah, I think that this is, it's a really scary time for people who are refugees and migrants that are non-white in these European countries. It's
agreed.
Yeah, this is an ongoing issue. So
agreed. And just about 30 seconds on the terror attack is a teacher named Samuel Paty. He was beheaded by an 18-year-old Chechen named Abdullah Anzarov. And the police apprehended him. They didn't apprehend him. They actually shot him dead in the streets after they ordered him to put down his weapon, and he said no, and he supposedly moved towards the police in a quote-unquote threatening manner, and the police decided to shoot him. And the reason why Samuel Paty was targeted by this 18-year-old Chechen who was a refugee who I think had ties to Moscow, is because he shared images of Charlie Hebdo in a classroom to talk about freedom of speech. And freedom of speech, which is part of the French motto, liberté, freedom, liberty. So he was killed. And years ago when they had the terrorist attacks in Paris with Je suis Charlie, we're seeing people in the streets en masse saying Je suis Samuel or Je suis Paty. So these protests are happening also in addition to the Gilets jaunes protests that are continuing on and the Gilets noirs protests that continue on in France.
Yeah, oh my gosh, thank you so much for mentioning those. I mean, there's other things we can talk about, but I think we've only got about a minute and a half left. So, so Joe, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I feel as though I was a bit out of it today, but you always bring me back in, and I really appreciate that about you.
You're very welcome, Catherine. And look, even when you're out, you're always in. So don't feel like, okay, man, I'm out of it. No. Even when you're out, you're in. So we want to make sure I clarify that. Next week, we want to give the listeners, the viewers, the supporters, our posse, our crew, what are we going to talk about next week?
Okay, this one's going to be really interesting. It's about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and public policy, which is really wordy. We'll get a better title, but I'm excited about that one. We kind of just came up with this recently, and I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So, yes. Oh my gosh, Joe.
Yes. So.
Oh, cool. Sorry, I was going to say thank you again. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Please do go and watch all the other ones that we mentioned. It's, we're trying to build upon, the ones we've done before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right.
Any
all right, everybody.
words?
Thank you. No last words for me other than please be safe, everybody. To all my brethren and sistren in the U.S., please vote. Kat, you're the best. Mwah. We will talk soon.
All right. Take care.